Hey Sarah, welcome back.
Hello.
This is sort of a different DogLab episode today because we are responding to a study that has made its way around, uh, popular media outlets since late last week. Um, I think most people have probably seen or heard of the study regarding dog breed and how that correlates to behavior. The name of the study is actually, I'm going to read it here because there's no way I can remember this. It is Ancestry Inclusive Dog Genomics Challenges Popular Breed Stereotypes. And the headlines from that study out there is that breed is not a reliable predictor of behavior. And if someone read one line down from the headline, the other key takeaway that people probably saw is that breed accounts for 9% variability in behavior. And I think those are sort of the two main points that people have seen and taken away. And it's definitely caused a bit of an uproar, I think, in a lot of dog circles in terms of the results and how they're being interpreted. So we thought it would be a good idea for us to get on and talk through this. In the spirit of transparency, both Sarah and I were on the early brainstorming team and are in the acknowledgments in this study as well. So some of the questions that were used to poll owners, we were on the team responsible for coming up with some of those. But really, what we're trying to do today is keep a neutral hat on because we were not involved with the statistics or the analysis or the findings or anything like that. We were merely on the team that helped come up with the survey studies. And I guess Sarah, maybe to start, I think it's probably important to talk about what the study, I guess, tried to do, and then sort of talk through, I think, the headlines and the findings that came out from that, and sort of give our take on what we've talked about privately before this, and sort of share that with everyone. So, do you want to try to give like a quick recap of what they were trying to do?
I'll do my best. So yeah, it was using a combination of owner collected surveys, and some people's hackles go up related to that. But I do just want to say, in defense of the researchers, like that's a very oft used way to collect data and good data, and a lot of the questions asked were pulled from previously validated surveys that have been used in canine research. So using a combination of owner collected data via surveys and genetic testing to go through and look at and sort of try to ascertain or learn more about what types of behaviors or traits, to what degree they varied based on a dog's breed or not. I hope that's a fair summary of what the researchers were trying to dig into.
Yes. And the headlines sort of everywhere, kind of splashed everywhere, was that, breed isn't a reliable predictor of behavior. And obviously, and probably fair enough, I think, that raised some hackles, in various communities.
I think it was more so the headlines, the general gist of the headlines was breed doesn't matter at all when it comes to your dog's behavior. You know,
Yeah.
and that's not what the study found, which I know we'll get into in a moment, and that's a pretty misleading and unfortunate takeaway for folks to walk away with.
Yeah.
And I think, like a lot of things, this is a much more nuanced discussion and conversation about the role that breed or breed group, which I think we can maybe talk about a little bit as well in terms of how the study was designed, influences behavior, or can how the likelihood of seeing a behavior can vary based on the dog's breed or breed group. It's a nuanced discussion, and the study results are nuanced. Media is rarely going to play into that nuance. They only have so much space and they need clicks. And not to jump ahead, but I also think that, and this is, individual decisions of the researchers, and I think that probably the way the discussion was framed and worded led to some of those statements in the media being made as well, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really unfortunate. I know like the dog world is not the only one that's susceptible to this. I know most studies, like you said, the kind of the clickbaity headlines, unfortunately, is a reality of our world. And, as we've mentioned before, it's nuance doesn't really scale in today's world. So especially for clicking, for getting clicks and
That's how we pick up on podcasts.
right. That's why we have long form podcasts. So
Yeah.
so we're hoping we can do that today. But yes, I do think it's fair is that one, like the headlines are definitely misleading, and you know even like the discussion in the actual study also didn't do a great job of presenting the findings as well, in our opinion. So because the findings were actually really interesting, but between like the discussion and the headlines, I think that's led to a lot of confusion. And we're fortunate enough to have a graduate degree in animal behavior and have at least a high level understanding of statistics and research design. But it's we can't expect everyone to have that knowledge, and some of the stuff is fairly complicated, I think, to go through and sort of tease it apart and really understand what's going on. So
And I
um,
think we can both emphatically say too, like, I have very little knowledge of behavioral genetics, and a lot of those statistics and the information in there was really hard to parse through. And I'd be lying if I said I had a totally wonderful understanding of it. But I hope that we can confidently say we have enough of an understanding to share some thoughts and reactions here
yeah,
responsibly.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So what would you say like are some of the you know key differences in terms of what the study actually found, I guess, and then versus what was presented in the media?
Yeah. So I know we'll come back to there's this kind of this 9% number being tossed around. And from what I can understand or gather, that seems to be kind of an aggregate or average, for lack of a better term, number to summarize all the different things they looked at. And sort of, if we lump them all together, we come out with this 9% number. When in reality, if you sort of parse through the study results, that 9% is coming from certain traits and behaviors that showed to be really not at all or hardly at all variable by breed. And those were behaviors that weren't under any selective pressure for us to have expected them to vary by breed. They were
Hmm.
just dog behaviors, like how your dog lays down or eats or poops or things like that. But then when we get into the behaviors and the traits that they looked at that we would expect to vary more by breed or breed group, we'll circle back to that, but because of selective pressures and because of original functions that the breeds were, that we chose them or wanted them to carry out, those ones showed to be pretty highly heritable and highly variable based on breed. And, just a few of them, like when it comes to sort of those more like modal action patterns, like really functional behaviors like pointing and retrieving and howling and things like that, like those showed to be really heritable, as did the types of characteristics that would have allowed individuals of certain breed groups to like carry out their jobs successfully. So when we look at they showed that when it comes to human sociability and what they call bidability, so sort of general responsiveness to humans, they could attribute more than 25% of the variation in that according to breed. And that was according to individual breed. That wasn't even just saying breed group. So like if you're a member of a herding group or a gun dog group, they were comparing individual breeds to one another, which you would assume would sort of dilute some of the findings. So then we put those all together and end up with this 9%, but it's actually more accurately said as, hey, some behaviors vary quite a bit by breed, and those are the ones we might expect to vary based on selective pressures of the past. And some behaviors vary not at all. And some were surprising. Like some, maybe we can touch on a couple. Some were super surprising and different than past what past studies have shown, and it will be interesting to see how future studies play out. So yeah, so I think that 9% number just feels, I don't know if I want to use the term misleading, but it does a poor job of reflecting the reality of what the study found. And I think that's what garnered such a big reaction from a lot of dog behavior professionals, because they were like, well, hey, wait, that's not a great way to communicate this to the public, who already feels often under so much pressure and so much guilt with these like old sort of beliefs that float around about like it's all how they're raised, and if your dog's doing X it's because you did Y. And it's like, I think there's a worry or a big concern among a lot of dog professionals who saw that 9% number and those headlines saying breed doesn't matter, it's not a factor, it shouldn't be a factor in choosing your dog, it's not a factor in how your dog behaves, and said like, this could lead people to a really making really unfortunate decisions, or will put a lot of guilt and blame on themselves when they shouldn't. That's
Yeah.
a bit of a ramble, but
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And again, like, nuanced discussions aren't really popular these days. And, so it's hard to go through that. Um, or it's hard to, or difficult to sometimes, I think, express like what the actual findings are, and even how we think about breed in terms of how we work with dogs, like the thousands of dogs that we work with every year. And, I think the reality is, regardless of what the study said, even if it said 1%, which it didn't, it said 9%. And again, there's certain behaviors that actually is much higher. But like, I'm not going to recommend to a family of 4 that they go out and get a Malinois,
yeah.
or, a cattle dog, for example. Like, there are breed considerations that absolutely need to be taken into account when doing that. But on the flip side, when we get behavior assessments that come in, and if it's a dog that people typically associate with aggression, let's say, let's pick like a German Shepherd or a Rottweiler, and they have aggression. Honestly, like in my head, I'm not usually thinking, oh, they're aggressive because they're a German Shepherd, or they're aggressive because they're a Rottweiler, because we see aggressive dogs in every breed. We see very, sociable and easygoing dogs in every breed. So, I do appreciate that fact with the study. It is challenging some of those assumptions that we have.
Yep.
But
And
again,
to your point, Brian, with that specific example, that was I think one of the things they showed was that agonistic threshold, or like the likelihood to display aggression in response to something, startling or fear inducing or whatever, didn't show to be, I think, hardly at all variable based on breed. So that sort of aligns. That's just funny that that's the example that you picked out, because the study actually played that out. And I think that one would feel surprising to a lot of folks. And it does differ, I believe, from some previous studies. So
mhm,
again, not that one is right or wrong, but I found that really interesting as a
yeah,
finding.
yeah, no, it is really interesting. I mean, sometimes like I might think about, if a dog is, fearful or anxious, certain breeds tend to have certain conflict resolution styles that are different than other breeds. So I might think about that, but I'm generally not being like, oh, this dog is aggressive because of this breed, or this dog is anxious because they're this breed. We're going to dig a lot more into the actual dog in front of us. So I do think, if it's opening up conversations around this, then I do think that's a good thing, because we really do have to look at the dog in front of us. And
Yeah.
and even that 10% number, it's funny that we were talking about this beforehand, but it's like, if we really think about how much do we attribute to breed when we're, working with a dog, or with a family, you know,
It
10,
varies.
it varies, but
It could be
10,
two, and I think it could be 2%, or it could be 50%, depending on what the issue is. And I think this leads into another point, depending how mismatched the environment is, or how sort of breed typical the dog's behaviors are. But to your point, how we're actually addressing and helping the dog, like, yeah, it's going to play a certain role, but
yeah.
yeah. And I think I do, to your point, I do think again, shades of gray, right? Like there's it's unfortunate that we couldn't land, instead of saying, hey, breed doesn't predict or like guarantee, of course it doesn't guarantee behavior. There's huge variability within breeds in terms of how likely they are to show certain behaviors or certain tendencies or breed typical traits. And then, but breed is not everything, and it's far from everything. So I think it's like having us all be okay with that messy middle gray piece that says, yeah, it can explain some of variability in behavior if you have a dog of a certain breed. And I think this is where it is important to challenge those stereotypes. And I think where it can be so tempting to explain behaviors based on what we assume are kind of those breed stereotypes, there's so much room for confirmation bias there, because at the end of the day, all of those behaviors are dog behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, is my border collie reacting quickly to fast moving objects because they're a border collie? Well, they're reacting that way because they're a dog, and that's part of the dog ethogram, but they might be more likely to display those behaviors and display them in all kinds of situations, and maybe have more intense responses or have a harder time not performing those behaviors than other breeds. So I think we're so set up to just have confirmation bias there that the behaviors that we see we can attribute to breed, when in fact, they're all part of the dog ethogram, like the catalog of dog behaviors, and it's just the frequency or probability with which they're displayed,
Yeah.
which certain ones are displayed, are going to vary by breed or breed group.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that piece of it, of saying like, well, let's really look here at some of the stereotypes or like sort of quick conclusions we draw to about certain breeds and what we can potentially attribute to breed and what we can't, because there were some really cool findings in there about that, but there were some other ones that I feel like the ones where it was breed is most meaningful were sort of pushed to the side and not talked about, and the other piece was emphasized, and that's a real shame.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And I think, and the other part of it too that I think concerned me watching our industry sort of respond to this is, there are, I would say, a lot of the people who pushed back against this study are also generally against breed specific legislation, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, again, and that's there's I do feel like there was a jump to throw out the results without looking at that nuance a little bit, and because people already do support things where, like, hey, we shouldn't be relying on breed to predict whether a dog is going to be aggressive or not, or should we allow them in our communities or not. And I was definitely a little concerned about sort of the jumps to some of those conclusions, but and again, it's like sort of where do you draw that line, and how much can you use breed to sort of make predictions or make recommendations. And so is it okay to make recommendations on what type of breed someone should get as a pet, but it's not okay to make recommendations on should we ban them from our community, and like where that line actually is, and how do we use this data to make those decisions, because these are pretty big things. I know that there's recent communities right now, even some BSL stuff in Canada, I think that recently got passed. I believe it was Manitoba, and so it is tough, and that's where I think it is important to, again, like, we have to be super careful about stereotyping a particular dog based on their breed, but that doesn't mean we need to completely ignore it either in terms of recommendations that we make. But yeah, there's sort of a messy middle there, and how do we use this data, and what are the consequences of using that data. And I don't know what the answer is. I have no idea, but it's just something that I've thought about, and I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation over the next number of years. And I hope the nice thing with the study, because I mean there is really reputable people behind this study. I mean that like this is like real science. Like this isn't like there's really strong scientists behind this, and hopefully this triggers even more research in this area. And we're all going to have to be ready, I think, to sort of be ready to interpret those results and maybe have some uncomfortable conversations at times, because it's a really fascinating and super interesting area. But wow, it's it's a can of worms, you
It
know.
is. And I think one other sort of thought I'd like to add about this that came to my mind when I read through the study itself, and that seems or feels relevant. I know I mentioned like kind of breed group a few
Hmm.
times, and I would like to call out, and I think some of what the researchers, based on their discussion and sort of the setup of like the initial setup or introduction of the paper, was really looking at how different our modern breeds that have been selected in the past, in the past 150 years. And we've seen this huge just diversification of different breeds. And one of the things that I think potentially may be lost there, and this is the wonderful thing about this, is the data's all there. So someone
Hmm.
could certainly do a follow up on this, is that, how do the results change if they looked at differences between breed groups, like sort of functional breed groups, so that you're not comparing. And that's an interesting discussion too. Like, are border collies so different from cattle dogs or Australian shepherds? And I can hear all the herding dog people going like, yes, like for all the
Yep.
world, yes, but like, but in what ways? And are all those herding dogs though like markedly different from toy breeds, and in what ways? And versus comparing all the individuals to one another,
Yeah.
because I think I said it near the beginning, but that feels in some way that it could end up diluting the results, because you have these dogs that sort of cancel each other out. Like, well, the Aussie's not that different from the border collie, so see, dogs aren't very different. And you're like, well, those
Hmm.
two aren't very different, and we might not expect them to be very different in certain ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so
Absolutely.
that would, I think, be a really interesting further line of research. But I think that in itself isn't an indictment of the study. Like one, and I think that's one of the things that people sometimes lose sight of too, is like no one study is going to be all things to all people and answer every question and be grouped just the way that I would prefer or you would prefer and answer the specific questions I have. Like, there's really cool information in here. And I
Yeah.
think it gives us some really cool things to build on,
Hmm.
to sort of refine or fine tune certain understandings of like some of the outcome, or test,
Hmm.
because who knows what the answer is really. Um, but some of those outcomes. So I think that's just sort of a worthwhile point mentioning as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's an important point. And again, and it's to even drive the point home further, like on the like when we do intake assessments, like we just don't ask what the breed is and say, okay, well, we know what the dog is going to be like and walk in, right? Like that would be
Yeah.
not good. And but at the same time, I still want to know what breed I'm dealing with when I'm walking into a consult. And if they do have aggression or anxiety or not coming when called or those types of things, like I'm absolutely going to consider breed in terms of like what is likely to motivate them, or what types of needs do they maybe have that that might be stronger than what other dogs have. So um, yeah, it's just one of those things where it's really nuanced. And I think it's tough sometimes when you have studies like this where it's like, this is part one, it's definitely to be continued. There's lots of information to go, but I do think sort of the key takeaway here is yes, it did show that breed does matter more for certain behaviors. And do we know, I don't have it in front of me, do you have in front of me which ones? I know there were several, I think, that were over 25%.
Yeah, that was, I talked about, it was like level of human sociability,
Yep.
level of bidability, so like responsiveness, which
Yep.
like just those two alone, and then I think toy play was another one. But just those two alone, like if we think about, and again, none of this is a guarantee.
Right.
right? Like, and I think that's one of the things the study was trying to or the discussion was trying to convey, where some of the nuance was lost.
Yes.
But that none of this is a guarantee, right? Like, just because golden retrievers are more individuals within a population of golden retrievers are likely to be identified as highly human social than more individuals within a population of dachshunds,
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to get a friendly dog who loves everyone they meet if you get a golden retriever.
Exactly. Yes. And I'm sure too, like if you ask like
But you can
any,
stack the deck in your favor.
yes, yes, exactly. And I do think that, I mean, that totally resonates with, I think, how we actually work with people and dogs, like we have many examples of golden retrievers who came in with bite histories and
Mm-hmm.
for a bunch of various reasons. Again, it doesn't mean they're bad dogs, but they did have bite histories. And, I think a lot of people are shocked to hear that. And we've had lots of dachshunds, which I do think scored a little higher on the agonistic,
They were
uh,
lower on sociability, I think.
lower on sociability. Um,
And again, not that they're antisocial.
right. But I mean, we've also seen like just like the most happy-go-lucky dachshunds you could
Oh
ever
my
meet,
goodness.
right? So it's like, so again, it's information, and I do like the way you mentioned it's like stacking the deck in your favor because especially when it comes to, I think, coaching families or people on like what breed or breed mix are they probably going to do most well with, like that should absolutely play into it if you're trying to maximize the likelihood of certain behaviors that you're looking for.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely by no means a guarantee.
Yeah.
And no matter how good the breeder is and how good the environment is and how well do with the environment, like you can still just have, things can go the way you don't expect because
Yeah.
behavior and genetics is so complicated, and there's so many factors.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's like at the end of the day, when we look at how do we help this dog, that really, then we really get into who is this individual? There may be some breed influences or some general sort of biological, like genetic influences, but also like all those other nature factors that we look at, like, health status and life stage and individual traits like impulsivity and, you know, big feelings and all that kind of stuff. Like, and what are the past life experiences? Like, we're taking all that into account in terms of how we help them. But I feel like where this information is really important for dog owners, if you're listening, you're a dog owner, to know and understand is, yes, if you have, as you said, Brian, if you have a golden retriever and they are not very social with people, you didn't mess up because golden retrievers are supposed to be friendly, so it must be something you did.
Exactly.
Right? And on the flip side of that, if you have a dog who tends to fall lower on the human sociability side, but you're not aware of that, you just assume every dog, if you raise them right, is going to be super happy go lucky, friendly, love everyone, you can really beat up on yourself, and we can say like, hey, you know what, that's not super out of character for your breed to be
Hmm.
a little bit more discerning and a little bit more aloof and not have such a big social circle. Like, that's, it can be helpful, I think, for people to understand that, because it's just so tempting to heap all the blame on yourself because of past kind of cultural messaging. It's just not accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So yeah. So I think that was all of the stuff I wanted to get out anyways, is,
Me
you
too.
know, and it's definitely interesting. And I do love how there's been lots of interest, from pet owners and from, behavior professionals and all of those things. And it's, I think the nice thing about this has generated a lot of discussion, and, that's why we're doing this, because there's so much, conversation out there, and it's a super important conversation. And, it's going to be interesting sort of how this plays out, and how this is going to be used in the future. Um, but I think, definitely, for pet owners out there, like I would definitely encourage you as well, like when these studies come out, a lot of them will link to the actual study. So if you can actually even just go through, and even the stuff you don't understand in terms of the statistics, but reading through like the discussion and the results. And I do think that that's always a good thing, because it's definitely what gets put in those story sometimes. It's really not doing a good job reflecting the findings. So you
Yeah.
just have to be really, really careful
Yep.
with that. And then even some of the reaction pieces, there are, you know, people can have agendas as well in terms of that. So it's just, they're going to hear what they want to hear, and actually taking a critical lens and kind of getting different reactions to it, and hearing different people talk about it, I think is always a good idea, especially if it's a study that you find really interesting and important. Is definitely go out and get some different some different takes on it.
Yeah. And I think, and maybe we can post in the comments, like I believe one of the researchers was sort of doing an ongoing like Twitter commentary of some of the findings. I believe that one of the other researchers is going to be talking a little bit more about some of the results. So we can always share those sort of we can add them to, I know we won't have them right away, but what we do have, we can add to the show notes.
Yeah, the show notes, and we can even tweet about those as well,
Yeah.
at DogLab_podcast, if you follow us on Twitter, so we can do that. But yeah, and the one thing I did talk about BSL, I just want to mention we do have 2 bully breeds and have had 3, so we're by no means are we proponents of BSL, but I think it was an
And
important point.
the study is very much in support of that not
Exactly.
being at all a legitimate option, as have so many other,
Yes.
studies.
Yes.
But yes, thank you for sort of clarifying that point.
Yeah. Just clarifying that point, because again, how we talk, we do have to be very careful about how we talk about breed, because it can be used for things like that are really not, not great as well. So it's just, I think that nuanced discussion, what are we actually saying, what are we not saying, is all really important. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And your dog's breed to varying degrees is absolutely one of the many components that goes into making them their very unique self.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.
Bye.
Bye.